The call came on a Monday morning. Just as I was prepping for a systems update presentation I'd spent the last 6 months quietly perfecting. The doctor's voice was low, steady, and merciless, in that practiced way like he delivered this verdict hundreds of times before. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 2. Treatment required. Immediately. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I just remember the slide on my laptop still glowing. New infrastructure. The heart of Stratex Dynamics. My name is Howard Easton. I'm 56, and for over 2 decades, I was the quiet force behind everything that kept Stratex Dynamics running, an enterprise software firm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'd seen 3 CEOs come and go, each bringing their buzzwords and business books. But I stayed, tucked behind servers and lines of code that most people barely noticed, let alone understood. I wasn't the kind who posted team selfies or gave TED-style updates in board meetings. I was from the generation that believed in building, not branding. And then he arrived, Chase Lorman, barely in his 30s, polished shoes, smartwatch strapped tight, full of optimization lingo, and a PowerPoint addiction. He walked in talking about speed and lean culture, but had no idea how the core architecture of our company even functioned. Within days, I'd gone from systems director to senior technical advisor, which was just a polite way of saying aging and expendable. I didn't argue. I've never been one for instant reaction. I'm the type who watches, listens, and prepares. The cancer diagnosis was just the first blow. Within 2 weeks of starting chemo, I noticed the signs: fewer emails from the executive team, calendar invites disappearing, meetings rescheduled without me. They said they were giving me space to rest, but I knew better. I was being ushered out quietly, like an old operating system they didn't want to admit they still depended on. What Chase didn't know was that the very system he was slicing into trying to streamline was something I had designed, optimized, and personally patented under the guidance of the former CEO, a man who once told me, "Howie, if you ever walk out of here, we'll be the ones begging to bring you back." At the time, it felt like flattery. Now, I realize it was a warning. By the 3rd week of treatment, my body was moving slower, but my mind wasn't. The chemo left a dull ache in my bones and a metallic taste in my mouth that nothing could wash away. Not coffee, not bourbon, not even silence. But I still showed up to work. I came in every day, not because I had something to prove, but because I knew the system better than anyone, and I wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. Still, the signs had been creeping in like rust beneath paint, subtle but irreversible. My access to back-end analytics had been quietly downgraded. My name was removed from a project dashboard I'd helped architect. One morning, I logged in to find that my calendar had been cleared for the week. No explanation. No meeting invites. No team updates. I had become a ghost in a place I'd helped build, and no one said a word. So when Chase Lorman, polished, young, ambitious, showed up at my office door on a quiet Thursday afternoon, I already knew what was coming. He leaned against the frame like he owned the room, one hand in his pocket, the other twirling a branded pen between his fingers. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was corporate, scripted, insincere. "Howard, you got a minute?" I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from me, though he didn't bother to sit. That told me everything. "I'll get straight to it," he said, in that overly calm tone people use when they think they're doing you a favor by being blunt. "You've been with Stratex for a long time. Your work's been foundational. No one's questioning that. But we're entering a new phase now: faster pace, leaner teams, realignment of priorities." He paused, maybe expecting me to object or plead or react in some way that would justify what he was about to say. I didn't. I just looked at him, this man who barely knew how our systems were wired, who had never debugged a line of code at 2 a.m., who thought experience was a liability and age a burden. "Effective today," he continued, "your position is being dissolved. We'll be offering a severance package. Of course, HR will walk you through the details. It's nothing personal. It's just the direction we're heading." I said nothing. I didn't need to, because while Chase spoke with the casual cruelty of someone who thought he held the upper hand, he had no idea what was buried deep in the paperwork he never bothered to read. He didn't know that the very infrastructure his department relied on, everything from client access portals to automated reporting, was running on a patented system I had personally designed and legally registered under my own name with a licensing clause that required my explicit consent for continued use. A clause nestled quietly in my employment agreement, reviewed and notarized long before his first job out of business school. So I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even flinch. I stood slowly, extended a hand he didn't take, and said only one word: understood. He gave a final nod, turned, and walked away, tossing one last comment over his shoulder like a paper towel in a trash bin. We just can't keep investing in someone whose best work is behind them. My face didn't change, my voice didn't waver, but something in me shifted quietly, irreversibly. I packed my things carefully, as if I were boxing up not just personal items, but 23 years of memory and meaning. A photo of my old team, a ceramic mug my daughter made in 6th grade, a paperweight with a quote about resilience that I'd stopped reading years ago. I left behind my key card and my company laptop, but not the USB drive I always kept in my jacket pocket, not because it held secrets, but because it held stories, photos from offsite retreats, snippets of code from the early days, reminders of the people we used to be before everything became about margins and metrics. As I walked through the open floor plan toward the elevator, a few heads turned, but most looked away. Some offered tight, uncomfortable nods. Others pretended not to notice at all. That's how silence works in places like this. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and it spreads. Outside, the late autumn wind cut through my coat like a warning. My hands trembled not from weakness, but from adrenaline. I wasn't heartbroken, I was curious. How long, I wondered, until they realized what they had done. I already knew the answer. Monday. The weekend passed not in noise or anger, but in a kind of heavy, echoing stillness that wrapped itself around everything. I didn't rage, didn't vent, didn't call anyone to tell them what had happened. Not my daughter, who'd already been begging me to slow down since the diagnosis. Not my brother in Chicago, who would have offered legal advice wrapped in sarcasm. And definitely not my ex-wife, who once told me I was married to the job, and meant it as both insult and diagnosis. I needed space. Not to grieve the job. I'd lost jobs before, though never one I'd poured this much of myself into, but to understand the insult. To unpack the arrogance it takes for someone who's never debugged a single error at midnight to stand in front of you and declare your lifetime of expertise redundant. That sting wasn't about position or pay. It was about invisibility, about being discarded by someone who never bothered to see you in the first place. Friday night, I walked for hours through the empty downtown streets of Cincinnati, past shuttered bookstores and flickering neon diners, letting the cold wind bite through the collar of my coat and numb the place where resentment threatened to settle. It was too early to call what I was feeling. Revenge it was closer to clarity, a sharpening of edges, a quiet inventory of what remained. By Saturday morning, I was back at my dining room table, the same place I'd written most of the early prototypes for Stratex's now central system. The laptop sat closed beside a stack of old manila folders, one of which held my original employment agreement. I had requested a clause be added to that contract 13 years ago, just after the company survived a shaky merger and the then CEO, a man who knew the difference between value and noise, had signed off on it without hesitation. I flipped through the pages slowly, reading each word like it was a lifeline. There it was, plain, binding, and beautifully overlooked. My full rights to the architectural framework of the company's back-end infrastructure under U.S. Patent number 784,229B, issued in my name, renewable only with my active participation. The system Chase now depended on, the one humming beneath every client interface and internal report, had an expiration date tied not to server space or updates, but to me, and that expiration was Sunday midnight. It almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was perfect. A clock ticking behind the scenes, invisible to the man who thought he'd already won. He'd pushed me out without ever asking how the system worked, let alone who owned the very code he was building his strategies around. And now he would learn, not through confrontation or noise, but through consequence. I spent the rest of Saturday crafting the email carefully. No anger, no threats, just clarity. The subject line was short: notice of IP usage termination. Immediate action required. In the body, I outlined the terms of the licensing agreement. I reminded them that continued use of my patented infrastructure beyond Sunday night would constitute a violation of federal IP law and trigger legal action. I attached a copy of the contract, the patent documentation, and a time-stamped record of my severance notice for good measure. Then, I signed it with precision. Howard Easton, architect, patent holder, Stratex Framework v4.2. I copied the message to their legal department, the company's general counsel, and yes, Chase. Then I clicked send, closed my laptop, and went for a run through the fog-lined paths of Eden Park, each stride pushing air back into my lungs and blood back into my legs, the ache of chemo clashing with the fire of resolve. I wasn't trying to get even, I was simply reclaiming the respect they thought they could erase. By Sunday afternoon, my phone started lighting up. First, a missed call from an unlisted number. Then a voicemail from HR wrapped in polite confusion. "Hi, Mr. Easton. We're reviewing some licensing concerns and would appreciate a quick clarification if you're available." A second message followed from the legal team, more urgent in tone. "Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss your prior agreement with the company's systems infrastructure." And finally, just past 9:30 p.m., an email from Chase himself. Subject line in all caps. Urgent. Contract misunderstanding. His message was full of awkward pleasantries and thinly veiled panic. "Howard, I believe there's been a bit of miscommunication. Let's touch base and resolve this before Monday. I'd like to speak directly. Please, call me." But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because by the time Chase realized what he'd done, the countdown had already begun and the only thing left to do was watch the clock. When Monday morning arrived, it didn't crash, a nit crept. Quietly, methodically, like a storm that had been building all weekend behind locked doors and unanswered emails. I was already up by 5. Coffee brewed strong and black, my phone fully charged and sitting face up on the kitchen table next to my open laptop. I didn't have a meeting scheduled. I wasn't even on payroll anymore. But for the first time in years, I felt something close to anticipation. At 7 a.m., the first ping came in, a system-wide alert forwarded to my personal email by an old friend in DevOps. Critical error, backend authentication failure. 2 minutes later, another message. Client dashboards inaccessible. Urgent. Then, a string of increasingly frantic notes followed: warnings, diagnostics, notices of downtime across multiple regions. And finally, a subject line in bold red flagged high priority. "Howard, please call me now. Chase." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because what was happening wasn't sabotage, it was inevitability. They had chosen to dismiss not just a person, but the knowledge embedded within the architecture of their company. They thought they'd replace me with a younger, cheaper title. But they had never replaced what I carried in my head, or what I'd protected with a signature 13 years ago. By 8:30, I was receiving texts from former colleagues. "Did you do this?" One said, "From Nicole in product," followed by, "Max is losing it. Meetings are being canceled, clients are panicking, and legal's gone silent." I could almost picture it, the fluorescent lights buzzing above a sea of confused employees, managers clutching coffee like lifelines, Chase pacing the hallway with a phone to his ear, shouting instructions no one understood. The system wasn't just down. The illusion of control was down with it. And yet, I wasn't triumphant. Not exactly. I wasn't smiling from a place of revenge. I was watching what happens when leadership forgets that infrastructure isn't just code, it's continuity. And continuity requires care. At 8:47, my phone rang. I let it buzz 4 times before answering. "Howard," Chase said, his voice strained and struggling for composure. "We need to talk." There was a moment of silence on my end, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I wanted him to hear the space between his demand and my decision. "I'm happy to talk," I said finally, "but not about employment." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said calmly, "we're not having a rehiring conversation. We're discussing licensing of my intellectual property as external partners." The air changed on the line, and for a second, I thought he might hang up. Instead, he said, with a tremble carefully masked behind corporate phrasing, "Let's not make this personal. Oh, it's not personal, I replied, my voice steady. It's contractual. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call, slid my phone into my pocket, and walked toward the front door. By 9:12 a.m., I stepped into the marble-floored lobby of Stratex Dynamics, not through the employee entrance where I used to slip in with a travel mug and laptop bag, but through the main double doors, dressed not for comfort, but for clarity. Heads turned as I walked past reception. The young woman at the front desk blinked twice before saying, "Mr. Easton, they're expecting you upstairs." The elevator ride was silent, except for the soft hum of floor numbers lighting up one by one. When the doors opened onto the 7th floor, the energy in the hallway shifted. I could feel the tension in the air, the whispers from cubicles, the startled recognition in the eyes of people who hadn't made eye contact with me in weeks. I was no longer just Howard, the quiet systems guy. I was something else now, something they hadn't planned for. Inside the legal conference room, the company's general counsel stood to greet me. There were 2 associates beside him and an older advisor I remembered from the last merger, back when Stratex was still small enough to care about the people who built it. "Howard," the counsel began, his tone polite but firm. "Thank you for coming in. We want to resolve this cleanly." I nodded, took the seat at the far end of the table, and folded my hands. "I'm here for clarity," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." He looked down at a folder in front of him, then back at me. "We've reviewed your original employment agreement. The system you architected was patented in your name, the licensing clause is enforceable, and the renewal expired at midnight last night." I said nothing. I let the facts do the speaking. "We'd like to propose a 1-year licensing extension," he continued, "with full operational access under the existing terms." "That won't work for me," I replied. There was a rustle of papers. A pen tapped against the notepad. The silence in the room thickened. "I'm not looking to return to the same terms," I added. "I'm here to renegotiate fairly. You're currently experiencing full infrastructure downtime, correct?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Then here's what I propose. 1.2 million for 12 months, non-exclusive, renewable quarterly, with full technical support, either from me directly or a vetted consulting team of my choosing. Additionally, public acknowledgement of the architecture's original designer and all internal and client-facing documentation." "That's a substantial adjustment," one associate muttered, though not loud enough to challenge. "It's a reflection of value," I said plainly, "something Stratex seems to have forgotten how to measure." The lead counsel leaned back, then glanced toward the hallway where, through the frosted glass, I could see Chase pacing like a man waiting for a verdict. He looked up once, and our eyes met. Just for a second. He didn't smile, and I didn't need to, because I hadn't come back for a job. I'd come back for what they never expected, the power to redefine the terms and the story. The room had shifted, not in temperature, not in light, but in power. It was subtle at first, the way the junior associate lowered her eyes when I glanced over, or the way the general counsel no longer leaned forward with that same measured confidence. Something unspoken had settled into the space between us. They were no longer assessing a former employee seeking relevance. They were confronting the reality that everything still standing beneath their operations depended on a man they had dismissed, both literally and figuratively. I watched them carefully as I laid out my terms, again not with defiance but with precision. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. Clarity was its own weapon now. 1.2 million non-exclusive license renewed quarterly, technical oversight retained by me or a team of my choosing, public attribution in company documentation my name, not a sanitized label or vague technical collaboration euphemism. The lead counsel didn't speak immediately. He looked toward the hallway, perhaps hoping for a lifeline, though Chase, to his creditor, perhaps out of fear, remained nowhere in sight. Instead, the advisor at the far end of the table cleared his throat and leaned forward. "That figure," he said slowly, as if tasting each word for bitterness, "reflects a significant increase over the previous agreement." "It reflects value," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Something your leadership team underestimated the moment they let me go without reading the contract or understanding what they built their business on." There was a pause, not because they had no counter-arguments, but because they had none that wouldn't confirm the exact arrogance that led them here. The silence said more than rebuttal ever could. The general counsel exhaled, then nodded once. "We'll need to take it to the board. I'll wait, I said simply. But I'd advise moving quickly. Every hour your systems remain unstable is another hour of diminished client trust and growing questions from investors. They didn't argue. As I stepped outside the glass conference room to wait, I caught sight of Chase through the corridor window. He was pacing, one hand gripping his phone tightly, the other moving in stiff, performative gestures like he was rehearsing excuses he hadn't fully formed. When he finally saw me, his steps faltered. For a moment, his face registered something between disbelief and defeat. He walked toward me slower than usual, voice leveled but no longer cocky. "Howard," he began, extending a hand I didn't take. "I didn't expect you'd come in person." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "You didn't expect a lot of things." He looked like he wanted to smooth things over, like he believed the damage could still be patched with charm and a carefully worded apology. "I think this has gone too far," he said. "We should have had a conversation before legal got involved." "You mean before you fired me?" I asked. He tried to smile, but the weight of the moment wouldn't allow it. "That decision," he began, "was made under incomplete information." "No," I cut in, calm but unwavering. "That decision was made out of ego. You underestimated me, dismissed years of work, and now you're facing the consequences. I'm not here to argue or relive it. I'm here to negotiate terms I already own." His mouth opened again, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. "I've documented everything, every clause, every timestamp, every email. I'm not just walking in with emotion, I'm walking in with facts and leverage." I started to turn away, then paused and added, "If you care about salvaging this, Chase, you'll stay out of the way and let legal do its job." As I returned to the conference room, the temperature had shifted even more. This was no longer damage controlled, was realignment. The power balance had tipped. I wasn't sitting at the table seeking a place anymore. I was the table. By noon, the legal team returned. The lead counsel's tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up just slightly, his tone no longer cautious but resolved. "We've reviewed your proposal," he began. "The board agrees in principle with one caveat. We'd prefer to refer to your system credit as a technical collaboration rather than a full patent attribution, public-facing, of course." I didn't even hesitate. "No," I said evenly. "I want it stated clearly and accurately, system designed and patented by Howard Easton. No spin, no ambiguity." His brow furrowed. "That kind of phrasing could impact internal narratives." "That kind of phrasing," I said, "impacts truth. The company ran on my architecture for over a decade. If you want to move forward, it starts with honest credit." A murmur passed through the room. Notes were taken. Eyes flicked toward the door, likely imagining Chase's reaction when the statement went live. But I didn't care, because this wasn't just about recognition. It was about erasure undoing it, preventing it, ensuring that no one who came after me would have to fight this hard to be visible. "I assume," I added, "you're aware of the implications if this licensing conflict isn't disclosed to the SEC?" That landed like a hammer. They knew. Of course they knew. A company operating on expired proprietary software without legal clearance faced not just lawsuits, but investigations, loss of stockholder confidence, and worst of all, questions they couldn't answer publicly without admitting their own negligence. By the time the meeting concluded, the deal was drafted. My rate, my timeline, my oversight. They offered consulting extensions. I said I'd consider short-term terms in my own schedule, under my own conditions. The final line of the licensing agreement was read aloud. "We acknowledge Howard Easton as the sole architect of the Stratex v4.2 infrastructure and recognize his continued oversight as critical to company stability moving forward." That wasn't a favor. That was a correction. As I signed the document, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't even thinking about the money. I was thinking about every technician, every engineer, every older worker who had ever been told they were past their prime, who had ever been replaced by someone flashier, cheaper, or newer, not because they were lacking, but because someone stopped seeing their worth. This moment, this signature wasn't just mine. It belonged to them too. By Friday afternoon, the official announcement went live. It arrived first in an internal memo, then made its way to a formal release that echoed across inboxes and industry channels. Effective immediately, Stratex Dynamics acknowledges the architectural and strategic contributions of Howard Easton as foundational to the company's infrastructure. His system, patent registered and uniquely designed, will remain a core element under a newly established licensing agreement. Mr. Easton will provide transitional oversight as an independent consultant. Tucked in the final paragraph was a quiet footnote, but one that said everything I had waited to hear. We regret that these contributions were not fully recognized sooner. I read those words twice, not because I needed their validation, but because I knew how many people in my position older, quieter, consistent rather than charismatic never got to hear anything like them. Recognition, for people like us, so often arrives too late or not at all. But this time, it had landed where it should, in writing, on record, and undeniably real. As I left the building that day, I noticed something had shifted, not in the glass walls or polished floors, but in the way people looked at me. The same faces that once turned away in polite discomfort now offered quiet nods, murmured congratulations, or gave the kind of half smile that said, "We saw what happened. We just didn't know how to say anything then." And I understood. Silence doesn't always mean apathy. It sometimes means fear or powerlessness or learned helplessness. But now, at least for a moment, that silence had broken. I didn't go back full time. That was never the plan. What I wanted wasn't a seat at their table. I'd built my own. The consulting contract I agreed to was for 90 days, enough time to stabilize what they'd unraveled and to train a new lead, systems architect, someone who wouldn't just know the code but would understand the why behind it. More importantly, I spent that time drafting a framework to protect future teams, policies for IP transparency, whistleblower protections tied directly to board oversight, and mentorship programs focused on technical ownership and credit attribution. I didn't want to just walk away with a win. I wanted to leave behind guardrails so no one else would have to rebuild what should have been preserved. 2 weeks into that new role, I found myself standing outside the building after another long meeting, watching the late autumn sky turn soft gray as interns trickled out in clusters. One of them, a young woman with a backpack too big for her frame and thick glasses that kept sliding down her nose, slowed as she passed me. Her eyes lit up with hesitant recognition. "Are you Mr. Easton?" I nodded. She smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it kind of changed everything around here. There's a Slack channel. They talk about it all the time. You made it okay to speak up." I smiled genuinely this time, not the composed smile I'd worn in conference rooms, but something warmer, deeper. "Then don't stop speaking up," I said. "Don't wait for permission." She nodded once, then ran to catch up with her group, disappearing into the rhythm of the city, leaving behind a strange stillness that wasn't loneliness, it was peace. That weekend, I finally took a train out of the city. No laptop, no business calls, no agendas. I sat by the window and watched the trees blur past as Ohio gave way to long stretches of open land, and for the first time in what felt like months, my mind wasn't drafting strategies or counter-arguments. It was just still. That night, I opened my old journal. I hadn't written in it since the diagnosis. Flipping through blank pages, I found one clean line near the center and wrote, "Not to remember, but to release." I wasn't asking for power. I was asking to be seen. And when they couldn't give me that, I built something of my own. Weeks later, Chase's departure became permanent. The language used was as vague as expected, irreconcilable leadership perspectives. But the internal narrative was clear. Other complaints surfaced. Processes changed. Exit interviews were restructured. IP reviews became standard onboarding. And at long last, engineers began receiving name attribution and documentation. The culture didn't flip overnight, but it bent slowly, steadily towards something better. I never returned, but my work stayed. The framework held. My name, once buried in the back end, was now printed in every system spec and investor deck. Not out of vanity, out of truth. And in the end, that's what this was. About not revenge, not vindication, but value. Quiet, undeniable value. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight louder. It's to stand so firmly in who you are that the world has no choice but to rewrite itself around you. If you've ever been made to feel like your worth ended the moment you slowed down, got older, or faced illness, know this. Your value was never defined by the people who failed to see it. And if you found strength in Howard's story, share this video with someone who needs to remember what quiet courage looks like. Subscribe for more true stories of grit, dignity, and long overdue justice. You're not alone, and you're not done.